You're listening to Florida Matters. I'm Matthew Peddie. When you hear the term romance novel, does it conjure up images of Fabio's flying hair or maybe some bodice ripping? Well, you can still find that between the covers of a romance novel, but there's so much more. You're just as likely to read about a baseball diamond as a bodice in the new universe of romance fiction. One thing these novels all have in common: two people making a connection.
What better way to get back at your ex than
No.
get me back here, parade me around Sandcliff like a trophy, right? I'm feeling a little cheap. I'm feeling a little used. I am.
That's a really interesting theory, and I appreciate why you would think that, but it was your idea to come here in the first place.
That's true.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't feel this way about you at all.
That's Rose Byrne and Ethan Hawke in Juliet Naked, a rom-com adapted from the novel of the same name by Nick Hornby. Now, Hornby's not exactly what you'd call a romance novelist. His stories deal more with men trying to figure out their place in the world. But it is one of romance novelist Alicia Thompson's favourite romantic movies. This Tampa area author is one of the guests you'll hear from over the next half hour as we dive into the steamy world of romance fiction. We'll talk about the bookstores, conventions, and community that have sprung up around this thriving genre. Melissa Saavedra is the owner of Steamy Lit, a romance bookstore with branches in Tampa and Deerfield Beach. She's also the founder of Steamy Lit Con, a romance book convention. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.
Also joined by Alicia Thompson, who is an author, and her romance novels include With Love from Cold World, The Art of Catching Feelings, Love in a Time of Serial Killers, and many others. So thank you, Alicia, as well.
Oh, yeah, thank you.
I want to ask you both, let's start with some stereotype busting. What are reactions you hear when you tell someone you work in the romance genre? Melissa, what about you?
You know, we mostly see it in like when we go to festivals. We go to a lot of festivals like LA Times, Miami Book Fair, the Tucson Festival of Books, things like that. And it's mostly, snickering, mostly from men who are walking past and they're like, romance, or like, ew, romance. You're like, who buys romance? Which it's always fun to hear. On a day-to-day basis, I think people are more like not as confrontational, so they don't say it to you to your face, but when you're at festivals like this, that you just kind of hear them pass by, you hear some of that, and it's always funny to hear.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Alicia, what about you? What is the response you get when you tell people that that's the genre you work in?
I think some people think of romance as being very kind of like cheesy or predictable, are words that I hear a lot. And my answer to that would be kind of that, any genre can be cheesy and any genre can be predictable. Like every book genre has those characteristics if you don't find the right book that's for you. So I always say that there's a romance out there for everybody. There's some romance that exactly hits whatever it is that you want it to hit. I also think it's kind of a challenge to write in a format that can be very formulaic and somewhat predictable, like they're going to end up together. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's one of the challenges of writing a romance, is writing a compelling and engaging and believable happy ending. Sometimes I think it's easier to be bleak than it is to be joyful, and that's something that I wish that people knew about romance. And then also you get some of the like not your mother's bodice rippers type of thing, which is always so funny because it's like, it'd be like saying football, like not your mom's football, and it's like because they don't wear leather helmets anymore. Right. It's like the Fabio days are just so far behind us and so different that I'm always like, where have you been?
Okay, so what makes a good romance novel then? Because there's a lot out there, right? It's a genre where there's people writing these things kind of every day. So how do you stand out? What makes a good one?
For me, a really good romance novel, it offers me a relationship that I can really root for and where I really feel like I know those people. Like I know those characters. I know why they care about each other. I'm very invested in their relationship together. But then there's more to it than that, because I think we don't fall in love in a vacuum in the real world. And in a book, I think that's true as well. So I love romances that really give me something about their work lives, about their belief systems, their perspectives, the way that they see the world. I just think that all of that makes a romance novel really rich. And it's a good opportunity for it because it's so character focused, that you're really getting to like see these people.
Melissa, what about you?
Yeah, I think romance is a good romance. It obviously is so subjective to who's reading it and what you're looking for. Also, what I like what people like to call a mood reader. So it just really depends on what mood I'm in and what will hit best at the time. But I think overall, I think just something that has, found family and things that are relatable in a sense, whether that's within the world or within the people in the book, and kind of how I can see myself in the book. And obviously, like a really great happy ending. And most importantly, just like a beautiful love story, I think.
Hmm. What about a sense of fun? How important is that to a good read?
I am the kind of reader who like really likes emotional books
Mm.
where like I'm gonna cry and go through like a roller coaster. So for me specifically, having fun is not what I'm looking for in a romance. But from time to time, like recently I picked up a book called All Superheroes Need PR by Elizabeth Stevens. And it was so much fun. It was a little bonkers. It was so funny. Books like that, right, that are funny and are more on like the rom-com side could really remind you how like good a rom-com is.
Alicia, you mentioned Fabio earlier. So when you think about the kind of presentation of a book, how important is the title and the cover art?
I mean, I think it's very important, and Melissa can probably speak to that even better, just as a bookseller who sees a lot of books and kind of sees like what moves off the shelves and stuff. And you see different trends. I mean, obviously, like right now, you see a lot of illustrated covers, and that's kind of the trend. And I think, you're seeing a lot of like very punny titles. Like, actually, my next book is called Never Been Shipped, because it's like they weren't shipped in a relationship sense, but also that they're on a cruise ship. And I'm gonna tell you honestly that I was very proud of myself for that title. Like, I came up with that title. Usually your publisher is like giving you all these pun titles, and frankly sometimes they're really not very good, and there's also just a lot of them, and it gets overwhelming to see all the different puns. But I was very proud of myself for that particular title.
Right. I mean, I can tell that you enjoy writing these titles, and you're kind of like alluding to other stuff like The Art of Catching Feelings, right? I think you mentioned you read The Art of Fielding. Is The Art of Fielding?
The Art of Fielding, yeah.
Yeah,
It's definitely an homage to that. And then, obviously the catching, yeah. I was proud of that too. I came up with that on the way home from the eye doctor, and I still remember I was like fully dilated, and I was like at a light, and I was like, ooh, I've got it.
Melissa, as a bookstore owner, how much do you think about the look of things that you're selling, the kind of tactile experience of going into a bookstore and perusing those spines and sort of cracking open the covers?
Yeah, I would say for titles, I don't think about them too much, but book covers are definitely what you see what sells and you see what doesn't sell. And I think a good book cover is really a really important marketing point. You all know the saying, don't judge a book by its cover, but we
Mhm.
absolutely do. And I think that having a really great cover is what's going to really catch the eye of a reader. We have some workarounds around that. If we see like, especially we know that a book is really good, like me or one of the booksellers have read it, and maybe the book cover is just not as eye-catching as others are. We'll do mystery dates with a book, so we create little like tags of the fun parts of the book, maybe some tropes. We try to relate it maybe to another book or another movie, or if like you like Taylor Swift, read this type thing. And we make some bullet points to sell that book as a mystery date, and so people don't know what the book is when they purchase it, and that does really really well for us. And it also like it's really interesting to see how much readers run to it, especially at our Tampa location.
Alicia, I was reading that you submitted your first manuscript to Harlequin when you were 16. So you must have known pretty early on that this is what you want to do.
Yeah, I mean, I've been writing since I was a kid, and I've been reading romance, I mean, since kind of the same era, so all of my mom's Harlequin Presents novels that used to come in like a little subscription box every month. I used to just really look forward to those and read all of them. And so when I was in high school, I was like, I could do this. I could write a romance novel. Keep in mind, I had never dated anybody before. Like, I had no romantic experience myself, but I was like, I think I could figure this out. So yeah, I sent away several romance novels that never went anywhere, which, nobody is surprised by.
But you kept going.
I kept going, yeah.
Yeah. How did it feel kind of getting those rejection letters? Was it tough?
The first one I ever got was a form rejection where they just basically say like, dear name, so sorry, but this is not the right fit. And it was the wrong name and the wrong title. So I maintain that that book was never rejected and could still be under consideration because technically I never got a rejection for that book. And then another time, I actually got a very long letter from the most British sounding name you've ever heard because Mills and Boon at the time, where I was sending it to anyway, was in the UK. And it was like just the most stereotypically British name, which I found delightful. And she actually wrote quite a lot. But a main thing was that she wanted me to make my character get pregnant, like a surprise pregnancy, which was very eye-opening to me as a 18-year-old because I was like, oh, this is how those plot points happen in these books, is that they're telling them to put them in there. So I did not think about even at that stage. And at that point, I was like, I don't know, man, I don't think I have that in me. So I didn't pursue it anymore.
Right, but then you started writing young adult fiction and then kind of made the switch to romance later.
Yeah, I've always read both young adult and adult, and so at the time I also, had this idea for a young adult novel, so I kind of switched and wrote one of those.
Melissa, when you opened your Steamy Lit South Florida bookstore last year, you followed pretty soon after that with the Tampa location, and just kind of looking at the way this got started, I was reading that the idea took off in 2020, right? So around the time of COVID. So just tell me about the genesis of what has become these brick and mortar bookstores and everything else that you've got going on in your romance empire.
Yeah, so when the pandemic hit, I was working full time as a travel coordinator. So I worked for a university in California where I coordinated all of their travel for all of their sports teams. And obviously, during that time, we were not doing any travel. So I found myself with a lot of time in my hands. And that's when I really dove into romance. I've always been a really big reader, but during the pandemic is when I really put my little claws in romance and I couldn't stop. That's kind of where the idea came up to create a subscription box because I was like, there's these great stories that we're not talking about. I also wanted to create another platform to amplify the work of authors that are part of marginalized identities and groups. And so I wanted to create this subscription box where we talked about romance, we talked about sex and pleasure, and just kind of created this space that was safe for us to dive into. And not in my wildest dreams did I ever think that the box would take off the way that it did, or that Steamy Lit will grow the way that it has. And as time progressed, and I made a move from California to Florida, one of the first things that I noticed when I moved back home to South Florida was that there weren't many indie bookstores, which when I lived in California, there were so many in San Diego. There was one everywhere. And so I started kind of thinking maybe should I do this? I obviously knew the Rip Bodice existed at the time. Meet Cute Bookshop in San Diego had opened by then. Love Sweet Arrow in Chicago was open. So there was a few. And so I was like, there's clearly a want for this in different communities. So why not here in South Florida? And that's when I decided to open up Deerfield, and shortly after Tampa.
What does that tell you about the demand for this genre of writing?
I think the genre is undermined a lot because for a long time it has mostly been led by women. And as a society, in a patriarchy, I think that when women are really good at something, there has to be something wrong with it, right? And so I think that the pandemic really brought out people to create all of these social media channels, and they removed shame from what they were reading and everyone was talking about it. And I think that the popularity of the romance genre that sprung through the pandemic and has kind of continued carried on has been because people have realized that ultimately they want and love to read about a good love story, something with a great happily for now or a happy ending, and that it's all of these universal feelings that we all go through, right? Whether it's found family, friendship, love, falling in love, your first kiss, having a crush on someone. This is all so many of us go through. And I think that people really were able to find themselves relating to these stories, but also that romance is so safe in that, you're going to get a happily ever after or a happily for now. And I think that in the state that the country has been in the past 5-6 years, more and more people want to find themselves in something that is comfort and something that is safe and something that is love.
Do you think you could have had the success that you've had with the subscription service and the bookstores and the convention with any other genre? Because, I mean, like, chain bookstores have been dying off for years, right? But independent bookstores do seem to be doing quite well.
The way that the romance community rallies around romance books, romance authors, romance stories is something that I've never seen before to this extent. I mean, just to give you like a little window into that, right? When we started Steamy Lit Con, we needed to do a lot of fundraising to be able to bring the con to life. And I mean, in like 30 days, we raised $185,000 just based on romance authors donating their time or their books and romance readers rallying around something they really wanted to see happen. And that's just like a very small window. And I really just don't think that there is another community like it that is so supportive and really, I guess, for all that it is, really wants to see the world in a better space.
Mm-hmm. How does that feel as a writer, Alicia, in this genre, like having that kind of readership? Because it sounds like they're pretty avid and they're going to be supportive of what you're putting out.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with Mel on that. And, you know, I was fortunate that I was able to go to the first Steamy Lit Con that she organized, and everybody was so blown away by how well organized it was, like how well run it was, and that it really was championing especially diverse authors, you know, and making sure that maybe BIPOC authors who are typically left out of the conversation are getting a moment, you know, to have panels and to do signings and stuff like that. And that is something that I think is very unique to romance. And as a writer, you know, sometimes it can be a little overwhelming. You know, I think a lot of writers are introverted by their nature. I definitely am. So sometimes it can be a little overwhelming to have that kind of avid
like a horde of readers.
Yeah, I mean, and not even like, I'm not even talking about like my specific readers, but just in general. Like sometimes it feels a lot like it's like this giant party, and sometimes you're like, I don't know that I have a giant party in me. But that being said, I just think it's so beautiful that it goes on, and that it's like all these people connecting over books, over stories, you know, like, and falling in love with these characters. I think that that's so cool.
You're listening to Florida Matters. Coming up, the conversation about romance fiction continues with Melissa Saavedra, owner of Steamy Lit bookstores in Deerfield Beach in Tampa, and Tampa Bay's own romance novelist Alicia Thompson. Stay tuned and find out why baseball may be the perfect setting for romance fiction. You're listening to Florida Matters. I'm Matthew Peddie. Let's get back to the conversation with romance novelist Alicia Thompson and Steamy Lit bookstore owner and convention founder Melissa Saavedra. Melissa, what is Steamy Lit Con like?
Steamy Lit Con is like a really like giant party for romance readers and romance authors. I can't even describe the aura and like the energy and the beauty that is Steamy Lit Con. For one, our mission is to amplify BIPOC authors. And so really being able to walk into a space where like the majority of our authors are of a marginalized identity, and so are the readers coming. It has been such a beautiful thing to see unfold, and being able to hear from authors that this is the first con that they walk into where they are the majority, and that they can't just like count how many, you know, other BIPOC authors there are in attendance, and for readers, for them to just feel safe when we have a party, you know, they're like, this felt like such a safe slumber party. It's really, I get like goosebumps every time I talk about it, but it's really such a beautiful convention. And really there's no other feeling like being in a room with thousands of romance readers and authors, and just being able to share in that love for the genre.
Alicia, I wanted to ask you a little more about one of your books, The Art of Catching Feelings. Now, you've got a main character who starts out as a non-baseball fan. You, however, you're a big fan of the Tampa Bay Rays, right? And the book launch was at Tropicana Field, and on your Instagram, you sort of document the games that you've taken a copy of the book to. Tell me a little bit more about your love of baseball and what makes that a good backdrop for a romance novel.
Yeah, I mean, there's that classic quote you've probably heard from Moneyball that's like the how can you not be romantic about baseball? And that's just how I feel. I think it's the most romantic sport. I think it's very patient. I think it rewards attention. It's a very smart sport. Like there's a lot of cerebral kind of thinking that goes into it. There's something very beautiful to me about the fact that, not to take away from baseball players, you know, talent or excellent physiques or anything like that. But I think it's kind of an every man's sport, I kind of feel like. Like, I feel like a lot of different body types can play it. A lot of different types of people can play it. And so I think that that's something that's very beautiful about it as well. And yeah, I've been following, the Rays. I always follow them. This season, obviously, they're not in the Trop, but it's been really fun to watch.
Yeah. How do you feel about the Trop?
Oh, don't get me started.
I guess that may be something that doesn't, maybe not necessarily have a happy ending, but we can hope, right?
We can hope. I mean, I'll be honest. I'll go on record. I never had a problem with the Trop. I thought it was kind of charming, so I'd be fine. I mean, put it back up the exact same way it was and put me right back in there. To me, it's home, so I don't have any problem with that.
Now, a couple of your other books, with Love from Cold World, you've got a love-hate relationship set in a winter-themed attraction in Orlando. Love in a Time of Serial Killers is about a PhD candidate obsessed with true crime. How do you come up with settings for your stories?
The settings a lot of times are based on a place that I am familiar with or just something that I'm really obsessed with at the time. Like, for example, in Love in the Time of Serial Killers, she goes back to her dad's house after her dad passes away to kind of take care of a lot of, his stuff. And I say Central Florida because this is the area that I'm from, but her dad's house is basically my house. Like, I just imagined my house as I was, writing the book. To me, it feels very connected to Florida and, Florida summer. And then with Love from Cold World, I remember seeing during the pandemic an advertisement for that Snowcat Ridge that was opening up in Dade City. And I remember thinking when I saw that, I was like, what is that? Why a winter outdoor park in Florida and you're opening it during the pandemic? I was just so shocked. And then I went on a deep dive on the website and got, somewhat inspired to write this idea about this fake winter park in Florida. And then it was funny because when I first went to Snowcat Ridge, years later, I had already written the book. I was like, oh my God, it's just how I imagined. But I realized, well, it's because you looked at the website a bunch. That's why. That's why it's just like you imagined.
Do you bump into fans? Like, say you're at a baseball game and you got a copy of your book, you're sort of waving it around. Like, did people catch sight of it and say, hey, I know that person?
I have actually. It's actually happened to me. It happened to me in Baltimore at the Orioles game, actually, which was really cool. Just because I did not expect it. It was somebody who had pre-ordered from my, Tombolo books in St. Pete is where I had done my pre-order campaign. And it was cool. She was like, yeah, I'm a big fan. And I saw you holding up the book. And I was like, oh my God, I think that's her.
Mm-hmm. When I think about some other genres, I think part of the attraction of, say, like crime fiction, for example, is you may have a character that you can meet multiple times over the course of a series of books, right? Like a detective or something. Do you get anything like that in romance, or does it tend to be each story is its own discrete thing with a kind of a beginning, a middle, and an end?
No, you absolutely do. I think different authors write, series, or sometimes they're interconnected standalones, which means each book will follow a different couple, but maybe it's all the same family or all the same group. And so you get to see little pieces of other characters in the book. Recently, Can't Get Enough by Kennedy Ryan came out, and it was the third book in a series of interconnected standalones. So when you're reading it, you're not only reading about the character that you have already learned about through the other two books, but you're also seeing glimpses of the friend groups and what their lives are up to, which I think is really fun. And to go one step further, Kennedy included characters from books from other series that are not part of this series. So for people who have been longtime Kennedy Ryan fans, being able to see these little Easter eggs of characters that they have grown to love and just seeing little glimpses of them on what their life feels up to is like catching up with an old friend, I think.
Mm-hmm. How do you approach that, or how do you think about that, Alicia, as an author? Like, are there characters that you want to bring back for another book?
Oh, for sure. Actually, yeah, the book that I have coming out, Never Been Shipped, is a side character from With Love from Cold World. And sometimes I won't say that I didn't somewhat think that I would write his book, like when he appeared on the page, but I definitely wasn't really thinking about it. But sometimes certain characters just kind of grab you, and you know that there's more to their story. Mm-hmm. And then, like Mel is saying, it's really fun to get to go back and put in little Easter eggs and put in the other characters popping up and having a little cameo and that kind of thing.
All right, so who are your favorite writers, like romance or otherwise? Melissa?
Oh, who are authors? Every time someone asks me like what my favorite books or authors are, I'm like, what? I think for me, Kennedy Ryan is probably my like go-to for everything. She is just a phenomenal writer that can really write these like heartfelt stories that are always touching on something more important than just us, right? Like her latest book is about a woman who is choosing to be childless and is dealing with a parent who has Alzheimer's. And so all of her books have these like very real life things that our main characters are tackling. And the way that she does it in such a like lyrical, like poetic way is just beautiful to me. So I definitely Kennedy. And then for something that's a little bit lighter, Alexa Martin is another phenomenal author. She writes some of the funniest books I've ever read. So I would say them too.
Mm-hmm. And Alicia, what about you?
Yeah, I had the benefit of getting some time to think about it. So
yeah, 30 seconds or so.
Right. I mean, off the top of my head, I will say Regina Black is one of my favorite authors. She has one book out, The Art of Scandal, which actually Steamy Lit has a special edition of, which has like a really, really cool cover, speaking of covers. I just love Regina's writing so much. She writes with such depth and such emotion, and she always has sentences that just pull me out. Like the second I read them, I'm underlining them, I'm thinking about them. It's like a blinking cursor in my mind. And she has a book coming out July 29th called August Lane, which is about a country music singer who basically stole this song from this girl he was dating, and then it became really famous. And now he's back in town. And there's a second chance romance aspect to it, but it's also a lot about like reconciling the art and what they've both been through because of this one song. And it's such a beautiful book. And then I also, lately, I've been really into a lot of, I read a lot of nonfiction, especially on Audible, or audio, I should say, because I do it mostly through the Libby app. And I'm really into like Adam Higginbotham books. So like his book on Chernobyl, I've read like 3 times in the last year, which is a red flag, I am aware, but it's a really good book. And then he wrote one about the Challenger too, that was really good.
The Chernobyl one, is that kind of giving you some ideas for like a romantic novel set in a fallout zone?
Right. Well, you know what's funny is a lot of people misunderstand With Love from Cold World as With Love from Cold War. So I think that could be my Chernobyl book, you know?
Yeah. We've been speaking with Melissa Saavedra, the owner of Steamy Lit, a romance bookstore with branches in Tampa and Deerfield Beach. She's also the founder of Steamy Lit Con, a romance book convention. Melissa, thank you so much for your insights. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
And Alicia Thompson, author, whose romance novels include With Love from Cold World, The Art of Catching Feelings, Love in a Time of Serial Killers, and many others. Alicia, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
That's our show for this week. Florida Matters executive producer is Grayson Doctor. Subscribe to Florida Matters wherever you get your podcasts, and we're on WUSF's YouTube channel too. Engineering support from Jackson Harp, Blake Bass, and Gio Galvin. I'm Matthew Peddie. Thanks for listening.